They looked at her old pistol and scoffed, a relic at the most advanced naval base. They called her the Ghost, a washed-up instructor haunted by her past. Then an EMP blast plunged everything into darkness. Their modern weapons became scrap metal, and they realized with terror the ghost they mocked with that obsolete pistol was their only hope of survival. The Southern California sun beat down on Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, a relentless hammer of heat that baked the asphalt and made the air shimmer above the training grounds. The late summer air was a thick cocktail of salt from the Pacific, the acrid tang of jet fuel, and the faint, ever-present scent of gunpowder. For Gunnery Sergeant Kaylin Vance, it was the smell of a life she no longer fully lived. At 32, she stood on the firing range with the rigid stillness of a statue, her storm-gray eyes watching a line of nervous recruits. She carried a profound silence, a weight that seemed to settle in the sharp lines of her jaw and the disciplined set of her shoulders. Her dark brown hair was pulled back into a severe regulation bun, a practical measure that also served to hide any trace of softness. She was a ghost in her own world, performing her duties as a marksmanship instructor with a detached precision that bordered on apathy. The only thing that truly connected her to the woman she used to be was holstered at her hip, a standard-issue M1911 pistol. Its blued steel was worn to a soft gray at the edges, and the checkered wooden grips were smooth from years of contact with a familiar hand. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a sacrament. "All right, Boots, listen up," a voice boomed across the range, dripping with the easy arrogance of a man who had never known self-doubt. Sergeant Jack's rider strode towards them, his frame tall and muscular beneath a state-of-the-art combat uniform. At 26, he was a rising star in Force Recon, his rifle festooned with the latest optics and attachments, a stark contrast to Kaylin's Spartan gear. He was the embodiment of the new, tech-driven Marine Corps. If you want a history lesson, take a look at Gunny Vance and her museum piece. Heard her late husband was into antiques too. Maybe that's why he... Ryder's voice trailed off as he met Kaylin's gaze. He didn't see anger. He saw nothing. It was a flat, chilling emptiness that unnerved him more than any outburst could have. He didn't know Elias Vance was her husband, nor that he had died in her arms. To Ryder, the jibe was casual barracks humor. To Kaylin, it was the deliberate twisting of a blade in a wound that never healed. She didn't flinch. Instead, she turned to a young, trembling female recruit whose shots were straying wide. "Squeeze the trigger, don't jerk it," Kaylin said, her voice a low, steady monotone that betrayed none of the storm raging within her. "Let the shot surprise you." She had grown accustomed to the whispers and the pitying glances, but the casual desecration of Elias's memory was a new kind of pain, one that threatened the iron control she had spent 3 years building. From his second-story office overlooking the range, Commander Marcus Thorne lowered his binoculars, his knuckles white as he gripped the windowsill. At 54, Thorne was the base's executive officer, a man whose silvering hair and the network of fine lines around his eyes spoke of a career spent making impossible decisions. He was Kaylin's former commanding officer, and one of the few who knew the full truth of her story. He felt a surge of fury at Ryder's casual cruelty, but he knew Kaylin would resent his intervention. She had chosen this self-imposed exile. His phone buzzed, displaying a single name, Aris. He sighed, the anger momentarily replaced by a familiar wariness. "Go ahead," he said into the receiver. "Father." The voice on the other end was sharp, impatient, and devoid of warmth. "I'm still waiting for your physical signature on the server access request. They're citing Black Star protocols. It's ridiculous in the 21st century." Aris Thorne, Marcus's 24-year-old prodigy of a son, was a civilian genius running a DARPA project from a high-security lab on the base. He possessed a brilliant mind and a disdain for the military world his father inhabited. Standing beside him, his lead assistant Lena, a sharp woman in her late 20s with an impeccably professional demeanor, adjusted her glasses and tried to look busy, well accustomed to her boss's tense calls with his father. "Aris, Project Chimera is a sensitive program. The protocols are there for a reason," Marcus replied, his voice strained. "Your bureaucracy is hindering progress that could redefine global security, and you're worried about a piece of paper," Aris retorted. "But of course, The paperwork is always the most important mission. The line went dead. Marcus stared at the phone for a long moment before looking back out the window. The recruits were packing up. Kaylin was alone now, methodically field stripping her M1911 on a small mat. She cleaned each part with a focused, reverent care, as if performing a sacred ritual. Marcus saw the same stubborn walls in her that he saw in his son. Both were brilliant, both were broken, and both had locked their pain away behind a fortress of their own making. He was a commander of men, but he felt utterly powerless to bridge the chasm that separated him from the two people he cared about most. Night in the barracks was never truly silent. The hum of the building's ventilation and the distant rumble of a cargo plane were a constant backdrop, but for Kaylin, the loudest sounds came from within. As she sat on the edge of her perfectly made bed, the polished wood of the M1911 cool against her palm, the quiet of her room was devoured by the roar of memory. The past arrived uninvited, as it always did. Afghanistan, 3 years ago. The sun was a malevolent god in a bleached white sky, baking the rocky floor of the Tangi Valley. Operation Nomad Fury had devolved into a desperate firefight. Her team was pinned down, the air thick with dust and the snap-crack of incoming rounds. Her husband, Staff Sergeant Elias Vance, a man whose calm presence was a fortress for his squad, was coordinating fire from a ridge to her left. He was lean and wiry, with kind eyes that could turn to flint in an instant. His voice, a steady baritone over the comms, was her anchor. "Kaylin, suppress that nest, East Ridge," he'd ordered, but then came another voice, a panicked shriek. "I'm hit! Oh God, I'm hit!" It was Private Miller, a kid of 19 with a face that hadn't yet learned how to shave properly, now writhing in the open, a dark stain spreading across his thigh. Kaylin saw the terror in his eyes, the sheer unadulterated fear of a boy confronting his own mortality. Elias's voice came again, urgent. "Suppress them, Kay! I've got you covered." It was the correct tactical choice. Neutralize the threat. But she saw Miller, and in that split second, she didn't see a soldier. She saw a child about to be slaughtered. She made a different choice. "Riker! Gibson! Get Miller!" she commanded, laying down a burst of suppressive fire toward the boy, covering his rescuers instead of the primary threat. The shift in fire created a momentary lapse in their defense. A heartbeat. That was all it took. The enemy machine gun nest on the East Ridge capitalized on it, traversing its fire. Kaylin saw Elias move to plug the gap, saw the dirt around him erupt in puffs of dust, and then saw him thrown backward as the rounds tore through him. The debriefing room back at Bagram felt colder than the Afghan night. Colonel Carl Decker sat opposite her, a man in his early 50s whose immaculate uniform and condescending air made him seem more like a corporate executive than a field commander. He never raised his voice, which made his words cut all the deeper. "Let's be clear, Gunnery Sergeant," Decker began, steepling his fingers. "You directly disobeyed a tactical command from your fire team leader. You prioritized one wounded soldier over the strategic imperative, resulting in the death of a more experienced NCO and 2 additional casualties." He reviewed the report with a theatrical sigh. "I saved a man's life, Colonel," Kaylin stated, her voice hoarse. Decker gave her a thin, pitying smile. "You traded a staff sergeant for a private, Gunny. A poor trade. You let emotion compromise your judgment." He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a pre-written confession of tactical error, a document that would quietly end her field career and serve as the neat, tidy conclusion to his flawed intelligence report. She signed it without a word, a cold numbness spreading through her. It was her burden to carry. The next afternoon, Marcus Thorne walked through the hushed, sterile corridors of the R&D complex. He pushed open the heavy door to Oris's lab, the temperature dropping several degrees. The air hummed with the sound of servers and cooling fans. In the center of the room, Oris stood like a conductor, his hands encased in data gloves. A swarm of small, insect-like drones, their bodies of polished black composite reflecting the blue light of the monitors, hovered in the air before him. They moved with a silent, fluid grace, their multi-lensed optics glowing faintly. "It's remarkable, Eris," Marcus said, his voice sounding rough in the pristine environment. "Chimera can disarm an explosive device from a kilometer away, analyze its components, and trace its origin, all in under a minute, Aris stated, his pride evident. This is the future. War without casualties. Clean, efficient, unemotional. Marcus's gaze lingered on the cold, perfect machines. War is never clean, son. I visited Gunny Vance. She refused an offer to return to a command role. Aris scoffed, letting the drones settle back onto their charging pads. Perhaps she finally realized the futility of it all. You know, my mother once told me she felt like a widow long before you ever deployed. She said your duty was a mistress you could never leave. You sacrificed this family for your higher calling. Now you're trying to play father to another broken soldier. The mention of his late wife Sarah was a deliberate low blow. Marcus felt it land with the force of a physical impact. He saw the years of missed birthdays, the lonely nights his wife had endured, all reflected in his son's accusing eyes. He looked at the perfect, unfeeling drones, and then thought of Kalen's imperfect human choice. His son built machines to prevent loss. Kalen had accepted loss to save a life. Both were trying to protect the world in their own way, yet they couldn't seem to protect themselves from their own pain. At precisely 0200 hours, the moonlit tranquility of the base was annihilated. A silent, ethereal pulse of sapphire light washed over Coronado, painting the buildings in a ghostly hue for a single, breathtaking second. It was followed not by a bang, but by an all-encompassing silence. The drone of air conditioners, the hum of transformers, the ambient glow of security lights, all vanished. Emergency sirens shrieked to life for a half-second, before being violently choked into nothingness. The technological heartbeat of the most advanced naval base in the world had flatlined. An electromagnetic pulse. It was a clean, silent, and utterly devastating attack. While confusion and nascent panic began to ripple through the darkened barracks, Gunnery Sergeant Kalen Vance was already moving. The sudden silence hadn't startled her. It had awakened something dormant within. Instinct, honed by years in the field, took command. Her eyes, already adjusted to the low light of her room, scanned the now dark compound. She didn't need power. She was a creature of an analog world. She slid the M1911 from its holster, the slide racking back with a satisfyingly mechanical shk-chk that was deafening in the new quiet. She secured 3 extra magazines to her belt, their weight a familiar comfort. From a worn footlocker, she retrieved Elias's old KABAR knife, its leather-wrapped handle fitting perfectly in her palm, and slid it into her boot. She was a ghost leaving her tomb, dressed in standard fatigues and armed with nothing more than steel, gunpowder, and a map of the entire base etched into her memory. As she melted into the shadows of the base, she passed the barracks of Force Recon. Inside, she could hear frustrated shouts. "The comms are dead! All of them! Damn it, the electronic lock on the armory is fried! We're locked out!" It was Jax Ryder's voice, stripped of its usual arrogance and laced with a panicked fury. He and his team of elite, tech-reliant warriors were trapped by the very systems they had put their faith in, rendered impotent by the silence. Kalen felt a grim, fleeting sense of vindication before pushing it aside. This was not the time. She moved on, her senses on high alert. Her ears, free from the distraction of ambient noise, picked up the subtle crunch of gravel under disciplined feet. Not the clumsy stumbling of disoriented Marines, but the measured rhythmic steps of a trained unit. They were moving in formation, using hand signals illuminated by faint chemical lights. They were professionals. Her eyes followed their trajectory, a straight, unwavering line across the base. They were heading for the R&D complex. Inside that complex, the laboratory's emergency lights had also failed, plunging the room into a near-total darkness, broken only by the intruder's helmet-mounted lights. Aris Thorne and his 2 colleagues, Lena and an older balding scientist named Dr. Finch, who was trembling uncontrollably, were cornered against a wall of inert servers. Their assailants were clad in matte black tactical gear, devoid of any insignia. The leader stepped forward. He was tall and moved with the fluid lethality of a panther, his face obscured by a ballistic mask. His voice, filtered through a non-electronic voice modulator, was a cold, metallic rasp. "Dr. Thorne, Project Chimera, the prototype and all related data, now." Aris, though his heart hammered against his ribs, straightened his back. The system is hardwired with a thermite self-destruct protocol. One command from me, and your prize becomes a puddle of molten slag. The leader paused, and Eris could feel the man's unseen eyes studying him. A commendable bluff, Doctor, the metallic voice replied. But our intelligence profile on you is quite thorough. You are arrogant, but you are not self-destructive. You would never destroy the single greatest achievement of your life. You will cooperate. The certainty in the man's voice chilled Oris more than the weapon aimed at him. He had been outthought. His own intellect had been used as a weapon against him. Miles away, in the Command Information Center, Marcus Thorne was in his own personal hell. The cavernous room, normally a vibrant hub of data streams and communication, was a tomb. The massive screens that lined the walls were blank, black mirrors reflecting the frantic, useless activity of his staff. "Get me a runner to the main gate. I want a sit rep now," he roared, his voice hoarse. He was a king without a kingdom, a general without eyes or ears. Just then, a young Marine, panting and wild-eyed, burst through the door. "Sir! Attackers! Multiple hostiles. They're professionals. They bypassed the west fence, headed straight for the R&D labs." The Marine's words confirmed Marcus's deepest fear. His son. The message delivered, the boy leaned against the wall, exhausted. Marcus stood frozen, the weight of his command, his helplessness, and his love for his son crashing down on him all at once. He was the commander of this base, and he could do nothing but pray. The interior of the R&D building was a maze of darkened hallways, a stark contrast to its usual brightly lit, sterile environment. Kaylin moved through it with a predator's grace, the rubber soles of her boots making no sound on the linoleum floor. She found Jack's rider huddled in an alcove, his high-tech rifle clutched like a useless talisman. The arrogant sergeant was gone, replaced by a pale, wide-eyed young man, stripped of his technological crutch. "They're professionals," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I couldn't do anything." Kaylin's gaze was hard, but not unkind. "You can still make a sound," she said, her voice a low command. She pressed a cold, heavy object into his hand, an old M84 flashbang she had liberated from a downed attacker. The East Corridor, 30 seconds, created diversion. Jax looked from the grenade to the unwavering certainty in her gray eyes. He saw no mockery, only a mission. He nodded, a flicker of his old confidence returning, now rooted in a purpose given to him by the very woman he had belittled. This was his chance at redemption. Kaylin reached the main laboratory door, which stood slightly ajar. Inside, the leader had removed his mask, and the sight made the air freeze in her lungs. It was Carl Decker, the same condescending smirk, the same cold, calculating eyes. He was older, more haggard, but instantly recognizable. The architect of her ruin, the memory of his betrayal, of his thin smile as he slid the confession across the table, surged through her. She forced it down. This wasn't about the past. Not yet. Decker was holding Eris by the collar, a pistol to his head. "Last chance, boy genius. The override codes." Suddenly, a deafening bang followed by a brilliant flash erupted from the East Corridor. Jax had done his part. Every mercenary, including Decker, instinctively flinched and turned toward the sound. It was the only opening she would get. Kaylin burst into the room. The M1911 bucked in her hand, its report a series of concise, brutal claps. 2 mercenaries went down before they could even register her presence. Decker spun around, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "Vance, you stubborn cockroach," he snarled, swinging his pistol towards her. "Your husband died because of your stupidity, and now so will you." The words were meant to break her, but they only forged her grief into a spear of cold, hard rage. In that moment of distraction, Aris acted. With a surge of adrenaline, he shoved a heavy cart of servers directly into Decker's path. The colonel stumbled, his shot going wide, shattering a monitor on the far wall. Kaylin's shot did not. The .45 caliber round struck him center mass, the impact lifting him off his feet and slamming him against the wall before he crumpled to the floor. The fight was over. Silence descended upon the lab, broken only by the ragged breathing of the survivors. Minutes later, the first wave of base security, led by a frantic Marcus Thorne, stormed the room. Marcus saw the neutralized attackers, saw Decker groaning on the floor, and then saw his son, pale but unharmed. He rushed forward, pulling Eris into a fierce embrace. "I thought," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I know," Oris replied, clinging to his father for the first time in years. "Dad, she saved me." They both turned to look at Kaylin, who stood near the door, the M1911 held loosely at her side, a wisp of smoke curling from its barrel. Justice was swift and absolute. Carl Decker survived, only to face a court-martial that stripped him of his rank and reputation before sentencing him to life without parole in the desolate military prison at Fort Leavenworth. His mercenaries received similar fates. The full story of Operation Nomad Fury was declassified, and Kaylin Vance was publicly exonerated, her name cleared of all blame. Jax Ryder received a commendation for his role in the diversion, but he also faced his own reckoning. In a formal base assembly, he stood before the new recruits and publicly apologized to Gunnery Sergeant Vance, his voice steady as he admitted his ignorance and arrogance. It was a lesson in humility none of them would ever forget. The Marine Corps offered Kaylin her old command back, a return to the elite world she had left behind. She respectfully declined. Instead, she submitted a proposal for a new training curriculum, analog warfare and contingency tactics. It was approved without hesitation. She would teach the next generation how to fight when the screens go dark. Weeks later, under a clear autumn sky, she stood before Elias's grave, not with his pistol, but with a single white rose. Marcus and Aris approached quietly. "Thank you, Kaylin," Aris said, his voice sincere. "You taught me there are some things that can't be programmed." Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're building a new legacy, Gunny," he said softly. "For him and for yourself." Kaylin looked out at the horizon, a faint, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time in 3 years. The scar of her grief remained, but it no longer defined her. She was no longer a ghost. She was a guardian, a teacher, a legend in the making. The story of Kaylin Vance reminds us that sometimes the greatest miracles don't come from the heavens with a flash of light. They come from the quiet strength found within a human heart that refuses to break. When all technology failed and all modern strength was rendered useless, it was an old relic and the unwavering spirit of a forgotten soldier that saved the day. Perhaps this is how God truly works in our lives. He doesn't always remove the darkness, but he places a light inside of us, a strength forged in our deepest scars, allowing us to become the miracle someone else is praying for. In your own life, you may feel like a ghost at times, overlooked, defined by past failures, and armed with nothing but old wounds. But remember Kaylin. Remember that what others see as a relic might just be your greatest source of strength. That pain you carry can be transformed into a purpose that no one else can fulfill. You are stronger than you know, and your moment to shine may come when all other lights go out. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might be walking through their own darkness. In the comments below, tell us about a time you found strength you never knew you had. Be sure to subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us of the hero within. May God bless each and every one of you, and may He grant you the strength to be a miracle in the world.